When hearts cross professional lines. The mahogany conference table reflected the afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows of Barclay Enterprises' 52nd floor. Grant Barclay sat at the head of the table, his steel-gray eyes fixed on Victoria Edwards as she delivered what she clearly believed was an irresistible acquisition proposal. But Grant wasn't looking at the projected numbers on the wall screen. His attention had drifted to the woman seated 2 chairs to his left. Ayanna King maintained perfect posture as she took notes, her elegant fingers moving across her tablet with practiced precision. 8 years of working together had created an almost telepathic communication between them. She sensed his disinterest in Victoria's proposal before he'd even shifted in his chair. A subtle shake of her head, barely perceptible to anyone else, confirmed what Grant already knew. Victoria Edwards was fishing in waters far too deep for her company's capabilities. "Ms. Edwards," Grant interrupted smoothly, "I appreciate the presentation, but Barclay Enterprises isn't interested in a merger at this time." Victoria's perfectly glossed lips tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Barclay, surely you can see the synergies between our companies. With your innovation and my international connections. The decision is final." Grant's tone carried the authority that had built his empire from a small tech startup to a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. He stood, signaling the meeting's end, and the other board members began gathering their materials. Victoria remained seated, her calculating gaze moving between Grant and Ayanna. "Of course. Though I have to wonder if your advisory team truly has your best interests at heart. Sometimes personal relationships can cloud professional judgment." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Ayanna's pen stilled against her tablet, but her expression remained professionally neutral. Grant's jaw tightened as he buttoned his navy suit jacket. "Ms. King has been instrumental in every major decision that's tripled our revenue over the past 8 years, Grant said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I trust her judgment implicitly. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have actual business to attend to." Victoria stood slowly, smoothing her pencil skirt. "Of course. Do give my regards to Quinn. I heard she's been having some difficulties at school. It must be challenging, balancing work and single parenthood." Ayanna's fingers clenched around her pen, and Grant felt his protective instincts flare. Quinn's struggles with bullying weren't public knowledge, which meant Victoria had been digging into his personal life. "Our meeting is concluded," Ayanna said, rising gracefully and moving toward the door with the quiet authority that had earned her respect throughout the company. "Security will escort you out." After Victoria and the other board members left, Grant found himself alone with Ayanna in the conference room. She was gathering papers with efficient movements, but he noticed the slight tension in her shoulders that most people would miss. "Thank you," he said simply. Ayanna glanced up, meeting his eyes briefly before returning to her task. She was out of line mentioning Quinn. She was out of line about a lot of things. Grant loosened his tie, a gesture Ayanna recognized as his signal that the formal part of their day was ending. How did she know about Quinn's situation? "I'll have Reed look into it." "But Grant." Ayanna paused, setting down the stack of papers. "She's not entirely wrong about one thing. You've been working yourself into the ground lately. Quinn needs you present, not just financially providing." It was moments like these that reminded Grant why Ayanna had become indispensable. She was the only person in his professional circle who dared to challenge him personally. Anyone else offering parenting advice would have been dismissed immediately, but coming from Ayanna, it felt like genuine concern rather than judgment. "I'm trying to be present. But with the Singapore expansion and the new AI division launching." He ran a hand through his dark hair, silver threading through the temples more prominently than it had even last year. "Some days I feel like I'm failing at everything that matters." Ayanna's expression softened, revealing a glimpse of the warmth she usually kept carefully controlled during business hours. "You're not failing. You're human. Quinn adores you, even when she's too shy to show it." The afternoon light caught the golden undertones in Ayana's dark skin, and Grant found himself noticing details he'd trained himself to ignore over the years. The way her full lips curved slightly when she offered encouragement. How her professional facade occasionally cracked to reveal the compassionate woman underneath. The graceful line of her neck when she tilted her head thoughtfully. He cleared his throat and moved toward the windows, putting necessary distance between them. Speaking of Quinn, she's coming to the office after school today. Charlotte has some charity function she couldn't reschedule. I'll make sure the conference room is available for homework, Ayana said automatically. And I'll stock the break room with those granola bars she likes. This was their routine. Charlotte dropped Quinn off when her social obligations took precedence over motherhood, which happened frequently enough that Ayana had created an entire support system for a teenager who spent more time at Barclay Enterprises than some of the employees. You don't have to. Grant began, then stopped. They both knew Ayana didn't have to do anything beyond her already extensive job description. Yet she consistently went above and beyond, not just for him, but for Quinn as well. I know I don't have to, Ayana replied quietly. I want to. Their eyes met across the conference table, and for a moment, the professional barriers between them seemed gossamer thin. Grant felt the familiar tightening in his chest that had become more frequent lately, a dangerous awareness of how much his life revolved around this woman who'd somehow become essential to both his business success and his daughter's emotional well-being. If you're enjoying this story of hearts that dare to cross professional lines, please hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your place in this community of passionate souls is waiting for you, and these stories of forbidden love have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. Ayana's phone buzzed against the conference table, breaking the moment. She glanced at the screen and Grant noticed a slight flush creep up her neck. Sorry, I should. She reached for the phone, then hesitated. Actually, it can wait. But Grant had already seen the name on the screen, Nathan. The same Nathan who'd been mentioned in passing conversations over the past few weeks. The Nathan from Ayana's church who'd apparently been showing interest that she'd been too busy to properly acknowledge. Take it, Grant said, his voice more clipped than he'd intended. We're done here anyway. Ayana studied his face for a moment, as if trying to decipher his sudden change in tone. Grant. I have calls to return, he said, already moving toward the door. Can you have the quarterly reports ready for review by 6? Of course. Her professional mask slipped back into place so smoothly that Grant almost convinced himself he'd imagined the moments of warmth they'd shared. As he walked down the hall toward his office, Grant tried to shake off the uncomfortable sensation settling in his stomach. He had no right to feel anything about Ayana's personal life. She was his executive assistant, brilliant and dedicated, but ultimately an employee. The fact that she'd been single for the entire 8 years they'd worked together was none of his business. Neither was her apparent interest in finally dating someone. But as he settled behind his desk and attempted to focus on contract revisions, Grant couldn't stop himself from wondering what Nathan looked like. Whether he made Ayana laugh the way Grant occasionally did during their late-night strategy sessions. Whether Nathan appreciated how Ayana's eyes lit up when she talked about books, or how she unconsciously tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating. Grant's phone rang, startling him from thoughts that had no business occupying his mind. Reed Stewart's name appeared on the caller ID, and Grant welcomed the distraction. Tell me you have good news about the Singapore deal, Grant said by way of greeting. Better than good. Rivera Industries is ready to sign, and the profit projections are exceeding our most optimistic estimates. Reed's voice carried satisfaction, but also concern. But I'm calling about something else. Victoria Edwards has been making inquiries about you. Personal inquiries. Grant's grip tightened on the phone. What kind of inquiries? School records for Quinn. Property holdings. Divorce proceedings. She's being discreet about it, but my sources caught wind. Whatever her endgame is, she's not giving up on the acquisition easily. Document everything. If she wants to play dirty, we'll be ready. Grant's protective instincts where Quinn was concerned could turn ruthless when necessary. And Reed? I want to know exactly how she found out about Quinn's bullying situation. Already on it. I should have answers by tomorrow. After ending the call, Grant stared out at the Chicago skyline. He'd built his empire by making calculated decisions, by keeping emotion separate from business strategy. But lately, the lines had been blurring. His feelings about Ayanna had been carefully contained for years, locked away in the same compartment where he kept his other inconvenient truths. But watching her prepare to open her heart to someone else was testing his control in ways he hadn't anticipated. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Come in. Ayanna entered carrying a coffee service and a tablet. She'd changed from her morning blazer into a soft sweater that hugged her curves more intimately than her usual business attire. Grant's mouth went dry. I thought you might need caffeine for the evening review session, she said, setting the tray on his desk. And I have Quinn's school online too. Something about an incident during lunch. Grant's attention immediately shifted to his daughter. Put them through. As Ayanna transferred the call, Grant caught a whiff of her perfume, jasmine and vanilla, a scent that had become so associated with comfort and efficiency that he'd begun to look forward to their morning meetings just to breathe it in. Mr. Barkley? This is Principal Morrison. I'm calling about an incident involving Quinn today. Grant listened with growing anger as the principal described how 3 girls had cornered Quinn in the cafeteria, making comments about her weird father who probably only cares about money anyway. Quinn had handled it with typical teenage stoicism, meaning she'd said nothing and retreated to the library for the rest of lunch. What are you doing to address this? Grant demanded. We've spoken to the girls involved, but without Quinn providing specifics about what was said. My daughter shouldn't have to provide a detailed report to protect herself from harassment. Grant's voice carried the same authority he used in hostile takeover negotiations. These incidents stop now, or we'll be discussing alternatives to Quinn's enrollment. After ending the call, Grant realized Ayanna had remained in his office, her expression concerned. How bad? She asked softly. Bad enough that she's going to need someone to talk to when she gets here. Someone who understands teenage girl dynamics better than I do. Ayanna nodded without hesitation. I'll clear my schedule after 4:30. This was what Grant meant when he told people like Victoria Edwards that Ayanna was instrumental to his success. She didn't just manage his business life, she'd somehow become the emotional support system that held his small family together. And the realization of how much he'd come to depend on her for everything that mattered was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. As Ayanna turned to leave, Grant found himself speaking before he could think better of it. The call earlier. From Nathan. Is everything all right? Ayanna paused in the doorway, her hand resting on the frame. For a moment, she looked like she might share something personal, but then her professional composure reasserted itself. Just church business, she said simply. Nothing that can't wait. But Grant had seen the flush on her cheeks when Nathan's call came through. And as he watched Ayanna disappear down the hallway, he realized that church business was probably the beginning of something that could change everything about their carefully maintained professional relationship. The thought should have been a relief. It should have been the solution to the growing awareness between them that threatened to complicate everything Grant had worked to build. Instead, it felt like the first crack in a foundation he hadn't realized he was standing on. Chapter 2. At 4:45, the elevator doors opened to reveal Quinn Barkley, her dark hair falling like a curtain across half her face. She clutched her backpack straps with white knuckles, and even from across the reception area, Grant could see the tension in his daughter's small shoulders. Hey, sweetheart, Grant said, emerging from his office to greet her. How was the rest of your day? Quinn shrugged, a noncommittal sound that Grant had learned meant she was processing emotions too complex for simple words. At 15, she possessed an old soul that sometimes worried him. Quinn observed the world with careful eyes, storing away details and injustices with the quiet intensity of someone who felt everything deeply but shared little. "Miss King is waiting in conference room B," Grant said gently. "She has your favorite study snacks and mentioned something about helping with that history project." For the first time since stepping off the elevator, Quinn's expression brightened slightly. She remembered about the Civil War timeline. "She remembers everything," Grant said, and the truth of that statement hit him with unexpected force. Ayanna remembered Quinn's projects, her favorite foods, her anxiety triggers, her small victories. She remembered details about his daughter that sometimes slipped past Grant's own overwhelmed attention. Quinn disappeared down the hallway, and Grant found himself following at a distance. Through the glass walls of conference room B, he watched Ayanna look up from her laptop as Quinn entered. The transformation in both of them was immediate and visible. Ayanna's professional mask completely dissolved, replaced by genuine warmth as she stood to embrace Quinn. And Quinn, his shy, guarded daughter who struggled to make eye contact with classmates, melted into Ayanna's arms like she'd been holding herself together all day just to reach this moment of safety. "Rough day?" Ayanna's voice carried through the glass, gentle and understanding. Quinn nodded against Ayanna's shoulder, and Grant saw his daughter's composure finally crack. The tears came quietly, the way Quinn cried, with dignity even in vulnerability. Ayanna held her, one hand stroking Quinn's hair while the other rubbed soothing circles on her back. Grant felt his chest constrict with an emotion he couldn't name. Gratitude, certainly. But something deeper and more complicated. Watching Ayanna comfort his daughter felt intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with family. With the kind of partnership that went far beyond professional boundaries. "They said I'm weird because I don't talk much," Quinn said when she pulled back, wiping her eyes with the tissue Ayanna offered. "And that Dad probably doesn't even notice because he's too busy counting money." Grant's hands clenched into fists at his sides. The urge to march into Quinn's school and demand answers warred with his knowledge that Quinn needed emotional support more than she needed her father's righteous anger. "People say cruel things when they don't understand what they're looking at," Ayanna said, settling back in her chair so she could meet Quinn's eyes directly. "You know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who notices everything, the way people feel, the way words can hurt or heal, the way the world works beneath its surface. That's not weird, Quinn. That's wisdom. But I'm not like other girls my age. I don't know how to be normal." Ayanna smiled, and Grant saw something in her expression that made his breath catch. It was maternal and fierce and protective in a way that spoke to his soul. "Normal is overrated," Ayanna said firmly. "And trust me, the girls who are being cruel now will spend the rest of their lives trying to develop the kind of thoughtfulness that comes naturally to you. You're not behind them, sweet pea. You're ahead of them." Grant had heard Ayanna call Quinn sweet pea before, but tonight it hit him differently. Tonight it sounded less like an endearment from a family friend and more like something a mother would say. The thought should have been alarming. He barely managed his own complex feelings about Ayanna without imagining her in maternal terms. Instead, it felt right. Natural. Like a piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Quinn began unpacking her homework, and Ayanna shifted seamlessly into tutor mode, helping organize the Civil War timeline with the same efficiency she brought to managing Grant's empire. But Grant noticed how she kept one hand available for Quinn to reach when explaining became overwhelming, how she anticipated Quinn's needs before they were voiced. His phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte, running late. Charity auction went long. Can Quinn stay until 7? Grant replied. Of course, though he knew Charlotte's running late often meant she'd found something more interesting to occupy her evening. At their divorce 3 years ago, Charlotte had made it clear that motherhood cramped her lifestyle aspirations. She loved Quinn in her own way, but her version of love required very little personal sacrifice. The contrast between Charlotte's distant maternal approach and Ayana's intuitive caregiving was impossible to ignore. Grant found himself wondering what his marriage might have looked like if he'd chosen a partner who understood that love was demonstrated through small, consistent acts of presence rather than grand gestures and social media performances. "Dad?" Quinn's voice startled him from his thoughts. "Ms. King wants to know if you need the conference room tonight for work." Grant looked through the glass to find both Quinn and Ayana watching him with expressions of concern. He realized he'd been standing in the hallway for several minutes, lost in contemplation. "No, it's yours for as long as you need it," Grant said, entering the room. "How's the project coming?" "Really well, actually." Quinn's voice carried more enthusiasm than Grant had heard in weeks. "Ms. King found this amazing database of primary source documents, and we're building a multimedia presentation instead of just a poster board." Grant settled into a chair across from them, officially making the conference room feel less like a workspace and more like a family dinner table. "Tell me about it." For the next hour, Grant listened to Quinn explain her project with growing animation. Ayana guided the conversation with subtle questions that helped Quinn organize her thoughts and build confidence in her ideas. And gradually, Grant began to see his daughter the way Ayana saw her. Not as a shy, struggling teenager, but as a thoughtful young woman with insights worth sharing. The most interesting part is how the letters between soldiers and their families show that regular people understood the moral complexity of the war, Quinn said, her eyes bright with discovery. It wasn't just politicians making speeches. Real families were wrestling with these huge questions about what was right. "That's a brilliant observation," Grant said, meaning it completely. "You're going to knock this presentation out of the park." Quinn beamed, and Grant felt a surge of paternal pride mixed with something else, a deep appreciation for the woman who'd helped his daughter find her voice. As Quinn packed up her materials, Ayana began clearing the snack containers with efficient movements. Grant found himself studying the graceful economy of her motions, the way she anticipated needs and fulfilled them without fanfare. 8 years of watching her work, and he was still discovering new dimensions of her competence. "Thank you," he said quietly, when Quinn stepped out to use the restroom. "For everything. Not just tonight, but everything." Ayana paused in her cleaning, meeting his eyes with an expression he couldn't quite read. "She's special, Grant. And she adores you, even when she can't show it. She opens up with you in ways she doesn't with me anymore." Teenage girls need safe spaces to process emotions without worrying about disappointing the people they love most, Ayana said gently. "It doesn't mean she loves you less. It means she trusts you enough to know you'll still be there when she's ready to let you in again." The wisdom in her words hit Grant like a physical blow. How had Ayana developed such insight into adolescent psychology? How had she learned to navigate the complex emotional landscape of a teenage girl with such natural grace? "You'd make an incredible mother," Grant said before he could stop himself. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was prepared to address. Ayana's cheeks flushed, and she looked away, suddenly fascinated by the papers she was organizing. "I should get these quarterly reports finished before tomorrow's board meeting," she said, her voice carefully neutral. Grant recognized the deflection for what it was, a return to safe, professional territory. But the awareness had been acknowledged, even if indirectly. The acknowledgement that Ayana possessed qualities that went far beyond her job description. That she'd become essential to his family in ways that had nothing to do with business. Quinn returned, chattering about ideas for her presentation, and the moment passed. But as Grant drove Quinn home later that evening, he couldn't shake the image of Ayana's face when he'd mentioned motherhood. There had been longing there, quickly masked but unmistakable. For the first time, Grant found himself wondering what Ayana sacrificed by dedicating herself so completely to his professional success and Quinn's emotional support. What dreams had she deferred? What relationships had she avoided? What version of her own life remained unexplored because she was too busy managing his? The questions followed him home and lingered as he helped Quinn with her bedtime routine. And later, as he sat in his study reviewing contracts, Grant realized that understanding Ayana's sacrifices only intensified the dangerous gratitude that had been building in his chest for months. She deserved more than a career spent in service to his ambitions. She deserved her own dreams, her own family, her own chance at the kind of love that builds rather than serves. The thought should have been liberating. Instead, it felt like loss, the first acknowledgement that the woman who'd become essential to his happiness might not remain his forever. Chapter 3. The following Tuesday evening found Grant and Ayana alone in his penthouse office, surrounded by the detritus of another 16-hour workday. The Singapore expansion required their immediate attention, and the Rivera Industries contract demanded perfection in every clause. Delivery bags from their dinner sat abandoned on the side table, along with Grant's suit jacket and Ayana's heels, small concessions to comfort as the night stretched toward 10 o'clock. The intellectual property clauses need restructuring, Ayana said, leaning forward over the contract spread across Grant's desk. Her silk blouse had replaced the blazer she'd worn that morning, and Grant found himself noticing how the soft fabric moved with her breathing. Rivera's legal team is trying to retain rights that could complicate our AI development. Grant forced his attention to the document she was highlighting, though his awareness kept drifting to her proximity. When had she moved close enough that he could smell her perfume? When had the space between them become charged with something that had nothing to do with business strategy? Here, Ayana continued, apparently oblivious to his internal struggle. Section 12, subsection 4. They want shared ownership of any innovations developed using their manufacturing processes. She leaned closer, her finger tracing the problematic language, and Grant felt his pulse quicken. 8 years of professional collaboration, and suddenly he was hyper-aware of every detail, the way her hair fell forward when she concentrated, the elegant curve of her neck, the warmth radiating from her skin. That's completely unacceptable, Grant managed, his voice rougher than intended. Our innovations stay proprietary, regardless of their manufacturing involvement. Ayana glanced up, and suddenly they were face to face, close enough that Grant could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility, with acknowledgement of an attraction that had been carefully ignored for too long. I'll draft the revision language, Ayana said softly, but she didn't pull away. We can't let them think we're negotiating from weakness. Grant's gaze dropped to her lips, then forced itself back to her eyes. You're right. We hold all the leverage here. But even as he spoke about business leverage, Grant was acutely aware of a different kind of power dynamic. The way Ayana's breath caught slightly when their eyes met. The way her professional composure flickered, revealing something warmer and infinitely more dangerous underneath. Ayana straightened abruptly, creating necessary distance as she reached for her tablet. I should email the revisions to their legal team tonight so they have them first thing in the morning. The spell broken, Grant tried to refocus on the contracts. But his concentration had been thoroughly derailed by those few seconds of awareness, by the recognition that whatever existed between them had grown beyond mere professional compatibility. His phone buzzed with a text, and Grant welcomed the distraction until he saw the sender, Victoria Edwards. Drinks tomorrow? I have a proposal that could benefit both our companies. Grant deleted the message without responding. Victoria's persistence was becoming problematic, especially given her obvious interest in undermining his relationship with Ayana. He made a mental note to have Reed investigate exactly what Victoria was planning. Victoria again? Ayana asked, having noticed his expression. She doesn't take no for an answer. She's threatened by you, Ayana observed, settling back into her chair with her tablet. By your success, your integrity, your refusal to compromise your values for her vision of partnership. Grant studied Ayana's profile as she worked, noting the subtle tension in her jaw that appeared whenever Victoria Edwards was mentioned. "Are you concerned about her interest in our business operations?" "I'm concerned about her interest in everything connected to you," Ayanna replied with surprising directness. "She's not just after a business merger, Grant. She's after a complete takeover of your life." The protectiveness in Ayanna's voice sent warmth spreading through Grant's chest. It was possessive in a way that had nothing to do with professional loyalty and everything to do with personal investment. "She's not a threat," Grant said gently. "To the business or otherwise." Ayanna's fingers stilled on her tablet screen. "I know that. I worry about people who don't understand boundaries. Who think persistence is the same thing as persuasion." Their eyes met again, and Grant realized they were no longer talking about Victoria Edwards. They were discussing the delicate balance between them, the professional lines that had been blurring for months, the growing awareness that required constant vigilance to maintain appropriate distance. "Boundaries are important," Grant agreed quietly. "They protect everyone involved." "Yes," Ayanna whispered. "They do." But even as she spoke about protection, Ayanna's gaze lingered on Grant's face with unmistakable longing. And Grant felt his carefully constructed emotional walls threatening to crumble under the weight of 8 years' worth of suppressed attraction. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility and fraught with consequences. Then Ayanna's phone rang, shattering the tension with jarring efficiency. She glanced at the screen, and Grant saw her expression change subtly. "I should take this. It's Nathan." Grant nodded, trying to ignore the spike of jealousy that accompanied Nathan's name. He'd been hearing about Nathan with increasing frequency over the past few weeks. Nathan who taught Sunday school, Nathan who organized community service projects, Nathan who represented everything stable and uncomplicated that Grant himself could never offer. "Hi, Nathan," Ayanna answered, her voice warming in a way that made Grant's stomach clench. "No, I'm still at the office." I know. We talked about work-life balance." She walked toward the windows as she spoke, unconsciously seeking privacy for a conversation that was clearly personal. Grant tried to focus on contract revisions, but found himself straining to catch fragments of Ayanna's side of the conversation. "Saturday would be lovely." "No, I think I can actually make it this time." "You're very patient with me." "I appreciate that." Grant's jaw tightened as he realized he was listening to Ayanna make actual plans with another man. For the first time in 8 years, she was prioritizing her personal life over his professional demands. The development should have been celebrated. Ayanna deserved happiness, companionship, a relationship that didn't revolve around managing someone else's empire. Instead, Grant felt like he was losing something essential. Something he'd never acknowledged wanting until it was being offered to someone else. "Sorry about that," Ayanna said, returning to her seat with slightly flushed cheeks. "Nathan's been very understanding about my schedule, but I think I owe him at least one proper dinner date." "Of course," Grant managed. "You shouldn't keep him waiting indefinitely." The words tasted bitter in his mouth, but Grant forced them out with professional courtesy. He had no right to feel territorial about Ayanna's romantic prospects. She was his assistant, not his partner. Her personal happiness was separate from their working relationship. But as Ayanna bent back over the contracts, Grant found himself studying the curve of her smile, the way her eyes had lit up when Nathan called. And he realized with dawning horror that somewhere along the way, he'd begun thinking of Ayanna as his. Not in terms of employment, but in terms of emotional partnership. In terms of the kind of connection that transcended professional boundaries and ventured into far more dangerous territory. "The Rivera revisions are finished," Ayanna announced, looking up from her tablet. "Should I send them now or wait until morning?" "Send them now," Grant replied automatically, though his mind was still reeling from his internal revelations. "Strike while we have momentum." As Ayanna worked, Grant found himself memorizing details he'd been carefully ignoring for years. The way she bit her lower lip when concentrating. How she tucked her hair behind her ear when frustrated. The graceful efficiency of her movements even when tired. He was cataloging these observations like a man trying to preserve memories before a loss. Which was ridiculous, because Ayanna dating someone didn't mean she was leaving. It just meant she was moving toward a future that didn't center around Grant Barkley's professional and personal needs. The thought was sobering. And terrifying. And completely inappropriate given their employer-employee relationship. Sent, Ayanna announced, saving the document with a satisfied expression. Rivera Industries will have our revised terms when they arrive tomorrow morning. Excellent work, Grant said, though his mind was far from business contracts. As always. Ayanna began gathering her materials, signaling the end of their marathon work session. But as she reached for her blazer, she paused and looked directly at Grant. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said quietly. Grant's heart rate spiked. "Of course. Do you ever wonder what your life would look like if you'd made different choices? If you'd prioritized different things when you were building all this?" She gestured around the opulent office that represented Grant's professional success. The question hit closer to home than Grant was prepared for. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you ever wonder if success is worth the sacrifice if you end up successful but alone?" Grant studied Ayanna's face, trying to understand what prompted such an unexpectedly vulnerable question. "Are you asking about my divorce?" "I'm asking about fulfillment. About whether building something extraordinary is enough if there's no one to share it with who truly understands what it costs to create." The raw honesty in her voice made Grant's chest ache. Because the truth was, he did wonder. Every day. And the person who best understood what his success had cost was sitting across from him, preparing to leave for a dinner date with another man. "I think," Grant said carefully, "that success without connection is just expensive loneliness." Ayanna nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's what I was afraid you'd say." She stood to leave, slipping her arms into her blazer with movements that suddenly seemed loaded with significance. As she turned toward the door, Grant found himself speaking before he could think better of it. "Ayanna?" She paused, looking back with raised eyebrows. "Nathan is lucky," Grant said simply. "To have your attention. Your time. He should appreciate what a gift that is." Something flickered across Ayanna's features, surprise, perhaps, or recognition of the deeper meaning behind his words. For a moment, Grant thought she might say something that would change everything between them. Instead, she offered a soft smile that felt like both acknowledgement and goodbye. "Good night, Grant." "Good night." After she left, Grant remained in his office for another hour, staring out at the Chicago skyline and wrestling with realizations he wasn't prepared to face. Somewhere in the space of 8 years and countless late nights and shared crises, Ayanna King had become more than his assistant. She'd become his partner in every way that mattered except the most important one. And now she was preparing to offer that missing piece to someone else. The thought should have motivated Grant to maintain appropriate professional distance. Instead, it made him want to fight for something he'd never acknowledged wanting. Which was dangerous. And inappropriate. And potentially catastrophic for both their careers and their carefully maintained friendship. But as Grant finally gathered his own materials and prepared to leave for another night of expensive loneliness, he couldn't shake the feeling that some risks were worth taking. Even if they threatened to destroy everything he'd worked to build. Chapter 4. The following Saturday morning brought an unexpected crisis that would test every boundary Grant and Ayanna had carefully maintained. Quinn called at 7:30, her voice thick with tears and barely controlled panic. "Dad, I need you to come get me. Please. Right now." Grant was immediately alert, adrenaline cutting through the fog of his too short sleep. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "I'm at Mom's, but she left for her yoga retreat this morning and I can't." I can't stay here alone right now. Something happened at Emma's sleepover last night and I need to come home. Grant was already reaching for his clothes. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Are you safe where you are? Yes, I'm safe. I can't explain over the phone. The line went dead, leaving Grant with 1,000 worst-case scenarios racing through his mind. Quinn rarely asked for help directly, and the controlled panic in her voice suggested something more serious than typical teenage drama. Grant dressed quickly and drove to Charlotte's Lincoln Park townhouse, his mind churning with possibilities. When Quinn emerged from the building, Grant felt his heart constrict. His daughter looked smaller than usual, wrapped in an oversized hoodie with her hair hanging loose around her face. Her eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. "Hey, baby," Grant said gently as Quinn climbed into the passenger seat. "Want to tell me what happened?" Quinn stared out the window for several blocks before speaking. Emma's older sister had some friends over, and they thought it would be funny to play truth or dare with the younger girls. They made me answer questions about you. About our family. About why Mom and Dad got divorced and whether you care more about money than me. Grant's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Quinn. They recorded it, Quinn continued, her voice barely above a whisper. They recorded me crying and trying to defend you, and they're going to post it on social media. They said it was hilarious watching the rich girl break down. Grant felt rage building in his chest, not just at the teenagers who tormented his daughter, but at his own helplessness in protecting her from this kind of cruelty. "Did you tell Emma's parents?" "Emma's mom said kids will be kids and I should learn to take a joke. Emma's sister said if I told anyone, they'd make sure the video went viral with captions about how I'm a spoiled brat who can't handle reality." Grant pulled into his driveway and turned to face his daughter directly. "Quinn, look at me." When she met his eyes, Grant continued. "None of this is your fault. None of it. And we're going to figure out how to handle it together, okay?" Quinn nodded, but Grant could see she was still processing the emotional aftermath of being targeted and humiliated. As they entered the house, Grant realized he was out of his depth. Quinn needed more than his promise to fix the situation. She needed someone who understood the complex social dynamics of teenage cruelty, someone who could help her process the emotional impact without making her feel more vulnerable. Without conscious thought, Grant found himself reaching for his phone. "What are you doing?" Quinn asked. "Calling someone who can help us figure this out," Grant replied, already dialing Ayana's number. Ayana answered on the second ring, her voice immediately alert despite the early hour. "Grant? Is everything all right? I'm sorry to call on a Saturday, but Quinn needs..." Grant paused, realizing he was about to ask Ayana to sacrifice her personal time for his family crisis. Again. "Actually, never mind. We can handle this." "Grant Barkley, don't you dare hang up that phone," Ayana said firmly. "What does Quinn need?" And that was why Grant found himself explaining the sleepover incident to his assistant at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning. Because Ayana never made helping feel like an imposition. She made it feel like family. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Ayana said without hesitation. "And Grant? Don't let Quinn blame herself for other people's cruelty. This isn't about her character, it's about theirs." 30 minutes later, Ayana arrived carrying bags from Quinn's favorite bakery and wearing jeans and a soft sweater that made her look younger and somehow more approachable than her usual professional attire. Grant felt his breath catch at how beautiful she looked in casual clothes, then immediately felt guilty for noticing his daughter's emotional state. "Hey, sweet pea," Ayana said, settling beside Quinn on the living room couch. "I brought chocolate croissants and righteous indignation. Which do you want first?" Despite everything, Quinn managed a small smile. "Can I have both?" "Absolutely. But first, tell me exactly what happened. Don't leave anything out." As Quinn recounted the sleepover incident, Grant watched Ayana's expression shift from gentle concern to barely controlled fury. But her voice remained steady and supportive, encouraging Quinn to express her feelings without judgment. "They're right, though," Quinn said when she finished. "About Dad caring more about work than family. He missed my school play last month because of a board meeting. He forgot my birthday dinner last year because of some crisis in Singapore." Grant felt each accusation like a physical blow, made worse by their fundamental accuracy. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but Ayana caught his eye and shook her head slightly. "Quinn," Ayana said gently, "can I tell you something about your father that you might not know?" Quinn nodded, clearly curious. "Every morning when your dad gets to the office, the first thing he does is check his calendar to make sure he hasn't missed anything important to you. Every single morning. And when there's a conflict between business and your needs, he spends hours figuring out how to handle both because he refuses to choose between loving you and providing for you." Grant stared at Ayana in amazement. How had she noticed details about his daily routine that he'd never shared? "When you had that anxiety attack about the science fair presentation," Ayana continued, "your dad canceled a meeting with the mayor of Chicago to drive you to school himself. When you were being bullied last month, he spent 3 hours researching anti-bullying policies and met with your principal twice. When you mentioned wanting to learn piano, he had a baby grand delivered the next week." "I didn't know about the mayor meeting," Quinn said quietly. "Because your dad doesn't show love by talking about his sacrifices. He shows love by making them silently, consistently, without expecting credit." Ayana's voice carried conviction that made Grant's chest ache. "The missed birthday dinner? He was negotiating a contract that would fund the scholarship program you suggested for underprivileged kids. The board meeting during your play? He was fighting to keep 300 people employed when a competitor tried to buy out our manufacturing division." Quinn looked at Grant with something that might have been understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. "Your father isn't perfect," Ayana continued. "Neither is any parent. But the idea that he cares more about money than you? Quinn, that's not just wrong, it's impossible. You are the reason he works so hard. You're the reason he built this empire. Everything he does is motivated by love for you, even when the execution isn't perfect." Grant felt tears threatening for the first time in years. Not because of Quinn's earlier accusations, but because of Ayana's fierce defense of his character. Because she'd been paying attention to his motivations and choices in ways that even he hadn't fully recognized. "I'm sorry, Dad," Quinn said, turning to Grant with tears in her eyes. "I didn't mean." "You don't need to apologize for being hurt, baby," Grant said, moving to sit on Quinn's other side. "And you don't need to defend me to anyone. But I do need you to know that Ayana's right. Every choice I make, every priority I set, every sacrifice I accept, it all comes back to you. To making sure you have every opportunity, every advantage, every chance to become whoever you want to be." Quinn leaned into Grant's arms, and for the first time in months, his daughter felt completely present with him. Not guarded or polite or careful, but genuinely connected. Our hearts recognize authentic love when we see it in action, don't they? The kind of love that shows up in daily choices rather than grand gestures. If this story is touching your heart, please hit that like button and share your own experiences with unexpected family bonds in the comments below. Sometimes the people who love us most are the ones who've been there all along, quietly building bridges we didn't even know we needed. So what do we do about the video? Quinn asked, pulling back to look between Grant and Ayana. We handle it, Ayana said with steely determination. Legally and strategically. Recording and threatening to distribute footage of a minor without parental consent crosses several lines. Emma's parents are going to get a very educational phone call from our legal team. Grant felt a surge of admiration for Ayana's protective instincts. She'd transformed from gentle comforter to fierce advocate in the space of seconds, ready to deploy the full resources of Barclay Enterprises to protect Quinn from teenage cruelty. But more importantly, Ayanna continued, we're going to make sure you have strategies for handling this kind of situation in the future. Because unfortunately, people are going to try to use your father's success against you throughout your life. You need tools for responding without letting their ignorance define your self-worth. For the next 2 hours, Grant watched Ayanna guide Quinn through role-playing exercises, confidence-building techniques, and practical strategies for dealing with social aggression. She addressed everything from how to shut down invasive questions to how to build genuine friendships with people who valued Quinn for her character rather than her father's wealth. And gradually, Grant began to see his daughter transform back into the thoughtful, resilient young woman she'd been before the sleepover incident knocked her confidence. More than that, Quinn seemed stronger than before, armed with new tools and perspectives that would serve her well beyond this single crisis. "Thank you," Grant said quietly during a moment when Quinn stepped into the kitchen for more juice. "For everything. For dropping your Saturday plans, for knowing exactly what she needed, for defending me when I couldn't defend myself." Ayanna met his eyes with an expression that was soft and warm and dangerous in its intimacy. "She's special, Grant. And she needed to understand that her father is special too. Sometimes we all need someone to remind us of our own worth." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that extended far beyond the current crisis. Grant realized that Ayanna had been reminding him of his worth for 8 years, not just professionally, but personally. She'd been seeing his character, his motivations, his heart, and reflecting back a version of himself that was worthy of respect and love. "You missed your date with Nathan," Grant said, the realization hitting him suddenly. Ayanna's cheeks flushed slightly. "I called him." "He understood." "He won't understand indefinitely if you keep prioritizing our crises over your relationship." "Grant." Ayanna's voice carried a warning note that suggested they were approaching territory too dangerous for casual conversation. "I'm just saying that you deserve someone who appreciates how extraordinary you are. Someone who understands that your loyalty and compassion and wisdom are gifts that shouldn't be taken for granted." Their eyes locked, and Grant felt the same electric awareness that had been building between them for months. But this time, it was intensified by gratitude and recognition and the intimate satisfaction of watching Ayanna with his daughter. This time, it felt less like inappropriate attraction and more like acknowledgement of a partnership that went deeper than professional collaboration. "Dad." "Ms. King." Quinn called from the kitchen. "Can we order pizza and watch movies? I don't want this day to end yet." The moment shattered, but its effects lingered as they settled in for an afternoon of pizza and classic films. Grant found himself studying Ayanna's interactions with Quinn, noting how naturally she anticipated needs, offered comfort, provided guidance. How easily she fit into their small family dynamic. And as the afternoon stretched into evening, Grant realized that somewhere along the way, his carefully maintained professional boundaries had become meaningless. Ayanna wasn't just his assistant anymore. She wasn't just Quinn's mentor and protector. She'd become essential to his happiness in ways that had nothing to do with business success and everything to do with the kind of love that builds families, creates homes, and makes all the professional achievements feel like they actually matter. The realization should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. Chapter 5. The week following Quinn's crisis brought an uncomfortable shift in the dynamic between Grant and Ayanna. The family afternoon they'd shared had created an intimacy that was impossible to ignore, even within the familiar boundaries of their professional relationship. Grant found himself noticing details that had nothing to do with business efficiency. How Ayanna's smile lingered when she talked about Quinn, how her eyes softened when she thought no one was watching, how her presence had transformed his house from a place where he slept into something that felt like home. By Thursday evening, Grant realized he was in serious trouble. Not just because his attraction to Ayanna had grown beyond professional appropriateness, but because he'd begun imagining a future that included her as more than his assistant. A future where Quinn's homework sessions happened at their dinner table, where Ayana's laugh filled their kitchen, where the three of them functioned as the family they'd been pretending to be for years. The fantasy was dangerous and self-indulgent and completely inappropriate given their employer-employee relationship. It was also becoming impossible to ignore. That evening, Ayana knocked on his office door with an expression Grant couldn't quite read. "Do you have a minute? I need to discuss something personal." Grant gestured to the chair across from his desk, trying to ignore how the soft lighting made her skin glow and her professional attire somehow seem intimate. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "Nathan has asked me to spend the weekend at his family's lake house," Ayana said without preamble. "It's a significant step in our relationship, and I wanted to give you advance notice in case any emergencies arise while I'm unavailable." Grant felt something cold settle in his stomach. "That sounds serious." "It is serious. Nathan is a good man, Grant. He's patient and kind and he wants to build a life with someone who can prioritize their relationship. He deserves that kind of partner." The words were clearly chosen to establish boundaries, to remind Grant that Ayana was moving forward with her personal life regardless of whatever existed between them professionally. They should have been reassuring. Instead, they felt like a challenge. "You're right," Grant said carefully. "He does deserve that. And you deserve someone who appreciates what an extraordinary woman you are." Ayana's professional mask flickered slightly. "Thank you. I think this weekend will help me figure out what I want my future to look like." After she left, Grant sat in his office staring at contracts he couldn't focus on reading. The idea of Ayana spending a romantic weekend with Nathan filled him with emotions he had no right to feel. Jealousy, certainly, but also something deeper and more desperate, the recognition that he was about to lose something precious that he'd never acknowledged wanting. Friday afternoon brought news that complicated everything. Reed called with updates on Victoria Edwards' investigation into Grant's personal life. "She's been digging deeper than we thought," Reed reported. "School records, medical files, financial statements. She's building a profile that suggests you're an unfit father who prioritizes business over Quinn's emotional needs." Grant's blood ran cold. What's her endgame? Best guess? She's planning to use Quinn as leverage. Create a public narrative about your parenting that forces you into a defensive position. Make you choose between protecting your daughter's privacy and maintaining your business reputation. The manipulation was breathtakingly cruel and strategically brilliant. Victoria had identified Grant's greatest vulnerability and was preparing to exploit it in ways that could damage both his relationship with Quinn and his professional standing. "Document everything," Grant instructed. "And increase security monitoring for both Quinn and myself. If Victoria wants to play dirty, we need to be prepared." That evening, as Grant drove Quinn home after dinner, he found himself studying his daughter's face in the rearview mirror. She'd been happier lately, more confident and communicative since Ayana's intervention the previous weekend. The idea of Victoria Edwards threatening that progress filled Grant with protective rage. "Dad?" Quinn's voice interrupted his dark thoughts. "Is everything okay? You seem stressed." Grant forced a smile. "Just work complications, baby. Nothing you need to worry about." "Is Ms. King okay? She seemed sad today when she helped me with math homework." Grant's attention sharpened. "Sad how?" "Like she was thinking about something that made her want to cry. But she was trying to hide it." Quinn paused thoughtfully. "She does that sometimes, pretends everything is fine when it's not. Just like you do." The observation hit Grant with uncomfortable accuracy. Had Ayana been struggling with her relationship decision more than she'd revealed? Or was Quinn reading emotions into professional stress? Saturday morning found Grant alone in his home office, ostensibly reviewing contracts but actually wondering what Ayana was doing at Nathan's family lake house. The mental images were torture. Nathan making her laugh, Nathan holding her hand during evening walks, Nathan having the conversations and sharing the intimacy that Grant had been denying himself for 8 years. By Saturday evening, Grant had reached a breaking point. He tried calling Ayanna twice, telling himself it was about the Victoria Edwards situation, but she didn't answer. Which was appropriate, given that she was on a romantic weekend with another man. Which made Grant's desperation to reach her completely inappropriate and thoroughly revealing about his true motivations. At 10 o'clock Saturday night, Grant found himself standing outside Ayanna's Lincoln Park apartment building with a bottle of wine and absolutely no justification for being there. He'd driven across the city without consciously deciding to make the trip, drawn by an urgency he couldn't rationalize and couldn't ignore. The building's security system required a buzz-in, which gave Grant a moment to question his sanity. What was he planning to say? How could he explain showing up at Ayanna's apartment when she was supposed to be at a lake house with Nathan? Grant was about to retreat to his car when the building's entrance opened and Ayanna emerged, dressed in jeans and a soft sweater, carrying garbage bags to the dumpster. She stopped short when she saw Grant standing on the sidewalk. "Grant? What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," Grant replied, relief and confusion warring in his chest. "I thought you were at Nathan's lake house." Ayanna's cheeks flushed in the glow of the streetlight. "I came back early. We need to talk, but not out here. Come upstairs." Grant followed Ayanna through the building's elegant lobby and into the elevator, hyper-aware of the confined space and her proximity. Her apartment was on the 8th floor, and the ride-up felt both eternal and far too brief. Ayanna's apartment reflected her personality in ways that Grant found unexpectedly intimate. Books everywhere, warm lighting, photographs of family and friends, and a sense of curated comfort that spoke to someone who valued beauty and meaning over luxury and status. "Wine?" Ayanna asked, noticing the bottle Grant still carried. "I brought it as an excuse to see you," Grant admitted. "Though I'm not sure why I needed an excuse after 8 years of working together." Ayanna opened the wine with efficient movements, but Grant noticed a slight tremor in her hands that suggested she was as affected by his unexpected presence as he was by being in her personal space. "Why did you come back from Nathan's early?" Grant asked as she handed him a glass. Ayanna settled into the corner of her sofa, tucking her legs beneath her in a gesture that was unconsciously graceful and thoroughly distracting. "Because I realized something that scared me." "What kind of something?" "I realized that I spent the entire weekend thinking about you. About Quinn. About the life I've built around your family instead of building one for myself." Ayanna met his eyes directly. "Nathan is everything I should want in a partner. He's kind and stable and completely available for a relationship. And I felt nothing. Nothing but guilt that I was wasting his time and mine by pretending I could love him when my heart belongs to someone else." Grant's pulse spiked. "Ayanna. I know this is inappropriate," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I know it complicates everything we've built professionally. But I can't keep pretending that what exists between us is just efficient collaboration and mutual respect. Because it's not. It hasn't been for a long time." Grant set down his wine glass and moved to sit closer to her on the sofa. "If this is a conversation about crossing professional boundaries, then I need you to know that you're not alone in having complicated feelings." "What do you mean?" "I mean that watching you with Quinn last weekend, seeing how naturally you fit into our family, realizing how essential you've become to both our happiness. It made me understand that I've been lying to myself about what I want." Grant's voice was rough with honesty. "I want you, Ayanna. Not just as my assistant, not just as Quinn's mentor, but as my partner in every way that matters." The admission hung between them, dangerous and exhilarating and irreversible. Ayanna's breath caught, and Grant saw his own longing reflected in her dark eyes. "Grant, if we do this, if we acknowledge what's been building between us, everything changes." "I know." Grant reached out to touch her face, his thumb tracing the elegant line of her cheekbone. Maybe everything needs to change. When Ayanna leaned into his touch, Grant felt 8 years of careful control finally shatter. He drew her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, how right this felt despite all the reasons it should feel wrong. "Are you sure?" he whispered against her ear, breathing in the jasmine and vanilla scent that had been driving him to distraction for months. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Ayanna replied, turning her face so their lips were almost touching. "I love you, Grant. I've loved you for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to imagine loving anyone else." Grant's response was to capture her lips with his own, pouring 8 years of suppressed emotion into a kiss that was desperate and tender and absolutely perfect. Ayanna responded with matching intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt as if anchoring herself to the moment. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "This complicates everything." "The best things usually do," Ayanna whispered, her lips curving into a smile that was soft and warm and thoroughly intoxicating. Grant kissed her again, slower this time, savoring the taste of wine on her lips and the way she melted against him with complete trust. Her hands moved to the buttons of his shirt, and Grant felt his world shift on its axis. "Ayanna," he breathed, catching her hands. "Are you certain about this? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to what we were before." "I don't want to go back," she replied firmly. "I want to go forward. With you. Whatever that looks like." Grant studied her face in the soft lamplight, searching for any sign of uncertainty. Instead, he found determination and desire and love so clear it took his breath away. "Then we go forward," he said, standing and drawing her with him. "Together." As Ayanna led him toward her bedroom, Grant felt the last of his resistance crumble. Whatever complications this created, whatever challenges they would face, he was tired of denying what had been obvious for years. He loved Ayanna King. He wanted her in his life not just as his assistant, but as his partner, his confidant, his future. And judging by the way she looked at him, with wonder and desire and 8 years' worth of suppressed affection, she wanted the same thing. The bedroom was dimly lit by candles she must have left burning when she went to take out the garbage. The soft light cast golden shadows across her skin as Grant slowly removed her sweater, his hands reverent as they explored the curves he'd been imagining for far too long. "You're beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "So beautiful I can barely think straight when you're near me." Ayanna's response was to pull his head down for another kiss, her lips parting under his with an invitation that made Grant's pulse race. They moved together with the kind of natural rhythm that suggested this moment had been inevitable, that 8 years of professional partnership had been building toward this personal union. When skin met skin, when gentle touches became passionate caresses, when whispered endearments replaced professional courtesies, Grant finally understood what had been missing from every other relationship he'd attempted. This sense of completeness. This feeling of coming home to a person rather than a place. "I love you," he murmured against Ayanna's throat, his hands mapping the elegant lines of her body. "I love your brilliant mind and your generous heart and the way you make everything in my life better just by being part of it." "Show me," Ayanna whispered back, her voice breaking with emotion. "Show me how much." And Grant did, with tender reverence and passionate intensity, until they moved together as one and the boundaries between professional and personal, between employer and employee, between Grant and Ayanna, dissolved completely into something new and precious and absolutely right. Later, as they lay entwined in the candlelight, Grant traced lazy patterns on Ayanna's shoulder and marveled at how natural this felt. How right. How much like coming home after years of being lost. "What happens now?" Ayanna asked quietly, her head resting on his chest. "Now we figure out how to make this work," Grant replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Because I'm not giving this up. I'm not giving you up. Whatever we have to change, whatever complications we have to navigate, we'll handle them together." Ayana lifted her head to meet his eyes. Together, she agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like wine and forever. Outside, the city hummed with late-night energy, but inside Ayana's apartment, wrapped in each other's arms, Grant and Ayana had found something worth risking everything to protect. They'd found love that transcended professional boundaries and created new possibilities neither had dared to imagine. And for the first time in 8 years, the future felt full of promise rather than obligation. Chapter 6. Monday morning arrived with the harsh reality of how dramatically everything had changed between Grant and Ayana. Grant stood in his office at 6:30, having arrived early to mentally prepare for the first day of navigating their new relationship within their existing professional framework. The weekend had been transformative, but the business world didn't pause for personal revelations. When Ayana entered his office at 7:15 carrying his usual coffee and the morning briefing materials, Grant felt his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine anticipation. She looked professionally polished as always, but Grant now knew the taste of her lips, the feel of her skin, the way she whispered his name in the darkness. "Good morning," Ayana said, her voice carefully neutral. But Grant caught the flush creeping up her neck and the way her eyes lingered on his mouth before moving to the safety of her tablet. "Good morning," Grant replied, accepting the coffee and allowing their fingers to brush deliberately during the transfer. "How are you feeling about the Rivera Industries presentation this afternoon?" It was a safe, professional question, but the subtext was clear. "How are you feeling about us? About this new reality we've created?" "Confident," Ayana replied, settling into the chair across from his desk with movements that seemed more careful than usual. "The revised contracts address their concerns while protecting our intellectual property. I think they'll be pleased with our compromise solutions." They spent the next hour reviewing presentation materials and discussing strategy, but Grant was hyper-aware of every gesture, every glance, every moment when professional necessity required them to lean close over documents. The familiar routine of their morning meetings had been transformed into an exercise in controlled desire and professional restraint. "We should probably discuss how to handle this," Ayana said during a lull in their agenda review, her voice carefully modulated but her meaning unmistakable. "Here? Now?" Grant glanced toward his office windows, where early employees were beginning to arrive and move through the hallways beyond. "We can't pretend nothing has changed," Ayana pointed out reasonably. "But we also can't afford to let personal feelings compromise our professional effectiveness." Grant studied her face, trying to read her emotional state beneath the carefully maintained professional facade. "Are you having second thoughts?" "No," Ayana replied immediately, then paused to consider her words more carefully. "But I am concerned about the practical implications. About what this means for our working relationship, for my credibility in the company, for your reputation as an employer who maintains appropriate boundaries." The concerns were valid and had been keeping Grant awake since 4 o'clock that morning. Barclay Enterprises had strict policies about romantic relationships between supervisors and subordinates, policies Grant himself had implemented to protect the company from the complications that inevitably arose when professional and personal relationships intersected. "What are you suggesting?" Grant asked carefully. Before Ayana could respond, Grant's intercom buzzed with his secretary's voice. "Mr. Barclay? Ms. Edwards is here for your 9 o'clock meeting." Grant frowned. "I don't have a meeting scheduled with Victoria Edwards. She says it's urgent business regarding the Singapore expansion. Should I tell her you're unavailable?" Grant met Ayana's eyes, reading the same concern in her expression that he felt building in his chest. Victoria's unexpected appearance couldn't be coincidental. "Send her in," Grant decided. "But make sure Reed is available if needed." Victoria Edwards entered Grant's office with the predatory confidence of someone who believed she held a winning hand. She was impeccably dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and her smile carried no warmth whatsoever. "Grant, Ayana," Victoria greeted them with false friendliness. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Actually, you are, Grant replied coolly. What can I do for you, Victoria? I have some information that might interest you about Rivera Industries' side negotiations. It seems they've been exploring alternative partnerships while pretending to negotiate exclusively with Barclay Enterprises. Victoria pulled out a tablet and began displaying what appeared to be confidential communications between Rivera Industries and 3 other companies, including Victoria's own firm. The documents were damaging if authentic, suggesting Rivera had been playing multiple suitors against each other to drive up acquisition prices. Where did you get these? Ayanna asked, leaning forward to study the communications with professional skepticism. Sources matter less than accuracy, Victoria replied smoothly. And I can assure you these are completely authentic. The question is, what are you planning to do about Rivera's deception? Grant studied the documents while his mind raced through implications. If Rivera Industries had been negotiating in bad faith, the entire Singapore expansion could be compromised. But Victoria's timing and sourcing made her motivations suspect. What do you want? Grant asked bluntly. Victoria's smile widened. Partnership. A merger between our companies that would give us combined leverage to handle situations like this. Together, we could dominate the Asian markets in ways neither company could achieve alone. We've already discussed this. Barclay Enterprises isn't interested in a merger. Things change, Victoria said, her gaze moving meaningfully between Grant and Ayanna. Sometimes circumstances arise that make previously unattractive options suddenly appealing. Sometimes people find themselves in positions where they need protection from potential scandals. The veiled threat was unmistakable. Victoria was implying knowledge of Grant and Ayanna's relationship and suggesting she might use that information as leverage. I think this meeting is over, Ayanna said, standing with the kind of quiet authority that had earned her respect throughout the company. Ms. Edwards, you can see yourself out. Of course, Victoria replied, gathering her materials with deliberate slowness. But Grant, you might want to consider my proposal carefully. Some opportunities only come once, and some problems only get more complicated with time. After Victoria left, Grant and Ayanna sat in tense silence for several moments. She knows, Ayanna said finally. She suspects, Grant corrected. But she doesn't have proof of anything inappropriate. Grant, I spent Saturday night at your house helping Quinn with a family crisis, and then I disappeared for the weekend only to return early from what everyone knew was a romantic getaway with another man. Now I'm sitting in your office at 7 in the morning looking like a woman who spent the weekend having her world turned upside down. Ayanna's voice carried frustration and concern in equal measure. Victoria Edwards is many things, but she's not stupid. Grant moved around his desk to stand closer to Ayanna, though he was careful not to touch her where they might be observed through the office windows. We haven't done anything wrong. We've crossed professional boundaries that exist for very good reasons, Ayanna replied. And Victoria is going to use that against both of us if we give her the opportunity. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meetings and presentations, but Grant found himself distracted by Ayanna's growing distance. She maintained perfect professional courtesy, but the warmth that had defined their interactions for 8 years seemed carefully contained. By lunch, Grant realized that Ayanna was protecting both of them by re-establishing professional boundaries, but the emotional cost was becoming apparent. The Rivera Industries presentation that afternoon went flawlessly, despite the morning's revelations about their potential duplicity. Ayanna's research and strategy had prepared them for every possible objection and negotiation tactic. But Grant noticed how she positioned herself physically during the meeting. Maintaining professional distance, avoiding eye contact that might be interpreted as personal, conducting herself with the kind of careful neutrality that emphasized her role as employee rather than partner. After Rivera's representatives left, apparently satisfied with Barclay Enterprises' revised proposals, Grant found himself alone with Ayanna in the conference room. That was excellent work, Grant said, attempting to return to their normal post-meeting debrief routine. Thank you, Ayana replied, but her tone remained carefully professional. I'll have contracts drafted by tomorrow morning for your review. Ayana. Grant began, then stopped as he noticed Quinn approaching through the hallway windows. His daughter was early for her after-school visit, and her expression suggested she had something on her mind. Dad? Quinn said, entering the conference room with the kind of careful observation that made Grant suspect she'd been studying the dynamic between him and Ayana. Is everything okay? You and Ms. King seem different today. Grant felt his stomach drop. If Quinn could sense the changed dynamic between them, how many other people had noticed? How long before speculation became gossip and gossip became ammunition for people like Victoria Edwards? Different how? Ayana asked gently, though Grant caught the tension in her voice. More careful with each other. Like you're both trying not to say something. Quinn settled into a chair and looked between them with the kind of teenage perception that was both insightful and inconvenient. Did something happen? Grant and Ayana exchanged glances, and Grant realized they were facing their first test of how to handle their relationship in front of Quinn. His daughter was observant enough to notice changes but young enough to be confused by adult complications. Ms. King and I are navigating some changes in our working relationship, Grant said carefully. Nothing for you to worry about. But Quinn's expression suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with that explanation. Are you still going to help me with my college application essays? She asked Ayana directly. Of course, Ayana replied immediately, her professional mask softening into genuine warmth. Why would you think otherwise? Because you're acting like strangers instead of family, Quinn said with the kind of direct honesty that teenagers wielded like weapons. And it's weird and uncomfortable and it's making me worry that something bad is going to happen. Grant felt the weight of Quinn's words settle in his chest. For 8 years, Quinn had grown up considering Ayana an integral part of their family structure. The idea that adult complications might threaten that stability was clearly distressing to his daughter. Quinn, Grant said gently, whatever changes happen between Ms. King and me professionally, her relationship with you doesn't change. She'll always be someone you can count on. Will she? Quinn asked, turning to Ayana with an expression that was both trusting and vulnerable. Promise? Ayana's professional composure cracked slightly, revealing the depth of her emotional investment in Quinn's well-being. I promise, she said softly. Whatever else changes, that doesn't. After Quinn left for her piano lesson, Grant and Ayana found themselves alone again in the conference room. The conversation with Quinn had highlighted the stakes involved in their personal decision, not just their own professional reputations, but Quinn's sense of family stability. This is what I was afraid of, Ayana said quietly. The complications extend beyond just us. Quinn's emotional well-being is wrapped up in our relationship, and if we handle this wrong, she gets hurt. So what are you suggesting? Grant asked, though he suspected he already knew where this conversation was heading. Ayana took a deep breath before meeting his eyes directly. I think I need to submit my resignation. The words hit Grant like a physical blow. Ayana, no. We can figure this out without you leaving. Can we? Grant, I've been your executive assistant for 8 years. My entire professional identity is tied to serving your needs and managing your life. How do I transition from that to being your romantic partner without creating impossible conflicts of interest? Grant felt panic rising in his chest. We'll restructure your role. Make you a business partner rather than an employee. Give you equal standing in decision-making. And how would that look to everyone else? Like I slept my way into a promotion? Like you're showing favoritism to someone you're romantically involved with? Ayana's voice carried pain and frustration. Grant, I've worked too hard to build my professional reputation to have it destroyed by speculation about how I really advanced in this company. The logic was undeniable, but Grant couldn't accept it. There has to be another solution. Maybe there is, Ayana said softly. But I need space to figure out what that might look like. Space to think clearly without the daily complication of reporting to the man I'm in love with." Grant stared at her, feeling like his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. "If you resign, what happens to us personally?" "I don't know," Ayanna admitted. "But I do know that staying in this position while we're romantically involved is a recipe for disaster. For both of us." As Grant watched Ayanna gather her materials and prepare to leave for the day, he realized that loving her might mean accepting her decision even when it felt like losing everything that mattered. The weekend that had brought them together had also created complications that threatened to tear them apart. And for the first time since building his empire, Grant wondered if professional success was worth the personal cost of the choices it forced him to make. Chapter 7. 3 weeks later, Grant stood in his penthouse suite at the Singapore Ritz-Carlton, staring out at the glittering skyline while holding Ayanna's formal resignation letter. She'd submitted it that morning via email, effective immediately upon his return from the Rivera Industries finalization trip. The words were professionally courteous and personally devastating. "After careful consideration, I have decided to pursue new opportunities that better align with my long-term career goals. I am grateful for the professional growth opportunities Barclay Enterprises has provided and will ensure a smooth transition of my responsibilities." No mention of their personal relationship. No acknowledgement of 8 years of partnership that had transcended professional boundaries long before they'd become romantic. Just polite corporate language that reduced their complicated history to a standard employment separation. Grant's phone buzzed with a text from Reed. "Victoria Edwards called a press conference for tomorrow. Says she has explosive information about Barclay Enterprises' unethical business practices. Legal says we need to respond." Grant closed his eyes, feeling the walls closing in from multiple directions. Victoria had clearly decided to escalate her campaign against him, probably using his relationship with Ayanna as ammunition. And now Ayanna was removing herself from the equation entirely, leaving Grant to face the professional and personal wreckage alone. His phone rang, displaying Quinn's contact information. Grant answered on the second ring, grateful for any distraction from his spiraling thoughts. "Dad?" Quinn's voice carried worry and confusion. "Ms. King came to say goodbye today. She said she's leaving Barclay Enterprises for new opportunities, but she seemed really sad about it. What's going on?" Grant felt his heart constrict. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Sometimes adults make decisions that don't make sense from the outside. Did you two have a fight? Because she's been different since that weekend when I was upset about the sleepover thing. More distant. Like she's trying not to care about us too much." The perceptiveness of Quinn's observation hit Grant like a physical blow. Ayanna had been pulling away emotionally, preparing for this separation even as she'd continued performing her professional duties with flawless efficiency. "Quinn, whatever happens between Ms. King and me professionally, she cares about you. That doesn't change." "But she's leaving," Quinn said, her voice small. "The person who understands me better than anyone except you is leaving, and I don't understand why." Grant stared out at Singapore's lights and realized he was tired of managing complications and protecting everyone from difficult truths. Quinn deserved honesty, even if it was messy and complicated. "Quinn, can I tell you something adult and complicated that you might not fully understand but definitely shouldn't repeat to anyone?" "Okay," Quinn said, curiosity replacing distress in her voice. "I'm in love with Ms. King. And she's in love with me. But we're both scared that being together romantically will ruin everything we've built professionally and hurt you in the process." Silence stretched across the international connection for several long moments. "Dad," Quinn said finally, "that's literally the stupidest thing I've ever heard." Grant blinked. "What?" "You and Ms. King have been acting like a married couple for my entire life. She manages your schedule, takes care of your health, worries about your happiness, and loves me like I'm her own daughter. You trust her with everything important to you, defend her against anyone who questions her value, and light up whenever she walks into a room. Quinn's voice carried the exasperated tone of a teenager explaining obvious facts to dense adults. The only difference now is that you've finally admitted you want to kiss each other. How exactly does that ruin anything? Grant found himself laughing despite the emotional chaos of the day. It's more complicated than that, baby. No, it's not. You're making it complicated because you're both scared of being happy. Ms. King thinks she has to choose between her career and her heart, and you think you have to choose between protecting her reputation and having her in your life. But those aren't the only options. What do you mean? I mean, make her your business partner instead of your employee. Give her equal standing so nobody can say she's using you for advancement. Then marry her and give me the mother I've been wishing for since I was 8 years old. The simple clarity of Quinn's solution cut through weeks of complicated emotional reasoning. Grant realized his 15-year-old daughter had identified the obvious answer that he and Ayanna had been too mired in fear and professional protocol to see. Quinn. Dad, I know you think you're protecting me by keeping your personal life separate from our family, but Ms. King is already family. She has been for years. Making it official wouldn't change anything except maybe you'd both stop being so miserable. After ending the call with Quinn, Grant sat in his hotel suite staring at Ayanna's resignation letter with new perspective. His daughter was right. He and Ayanna had been so focused on protecting their professional relationship that they'd lost sight of what actually mattered. They'd built something extraordinary together over 8 years, something that transcended typical employer-employee dynamics. The romantic component didn't diminish that partnership, it completed it. Grant spent the next hour drafting emails to his legal team, his board of directors, and Reed Stewart. If Ayanna was determined to leave Barclay Enterprises to preserve her professional integrity, then Grant would restructure the entire company to make staying an option she could accept with pride. By morning, Grant had outlined a comprehensive plan that would transform Ayanna from executive assistant to executive partner, with equal decision-making authority and independent compensation structure. It was a radical reorganization that would require board approval and significant legal restructuring, but it was also the obvious evolution of a partnership that had been functioning at executive level for years. The Rivera Industries contract signing proceeded smoothly, with both parties satisfied by the negotiations Ayanna had orchestrated. But Grant's mind was already on the next phase of his plan. Returning to Chicago and convincing the woman he loved that they could have both professional respect and personal happiness. Grant's flight back to Chicago was delayed by weather, giving him additional time to refine his proposal and prepare for what might be the most important business presentation of his life. By the time he landed at O'Hare, Grant felt ready to fight for the future he wanted rather than settling for the compromise that fear had dictated. But first, he had to deal with Victoria Edwards. The press conference was scheduled for 4 o'clock at a downtown hotel, giving Grant just enough time to stop by his office and coordinate with Reed and the legal team. Victoria's explosive information turned out to be allegations about Grant's relationship with Ayanna, combined with insinuations about nepotism and inappropriate workplace conduct. She's claiming you've been romantically involved with your assistant for years while giving her unearned promotions and decision-making authority, Reed reported as they drove to the hotel. She's also suggesting Quinn's been exposed to inappropriate workplace dynamics because of your unprofessional relationship. Grant felt cold rage building in his chest. Attacking him professionally was one thing, but involving Quinn crossed every line of decency. How are we responding? Grant asked. With facts, Reed replied grimly. Ayanna's performance reviews, salary history, educational credentials, and professional accomplishments. We're documenting 8 years of exemplary work that speaks for itself. And we're prepared to discuss your personal life with complete transparency if necessary. The press conference was a media circus, with Victoria Edwards playing the role of concerned business leader exposing corporate corruption. She presented her allegations with the kind of dramatic flair that suggested she'd been planning this performance for months. Grant Barkley has been conducting an inappropriate relationship with his subordinate while giving her access to confidential information and decision-making authority she hasn't earned, Victoria announced to the assembled reporters. This represents a serious breach of corporate ethics and fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. When the questions turned to Grant, he stood and addressed the room with the kind of calm authority that had built his empire. Ms. Edwards' allegations are both factually incorrect and personally motivated, Grant began. Ayanna King has been my executive assistant for 8 years, during which time she has demonstrated exceptional competence, integrity, and professional judgment. Every promotion, every increase in responsibility, every salary adjustment has been based on performance and merit, as documented in her annual reviews. A reporter raised her hand. But what about the personal relationship? Are you romantically involved with Ms. King? Grant paused, realizing this was the moment that would define how he handled the intersection of his personal and professional life going forward. Ayanna King and I have developed feelings for each other over the course of our 8-year professional partnership, Grant said clearly. Those feelings have never compromised our professional judgment or business decisions. Ms. King has earned every aspect of her position through competence and dedication. Any suggestion otherwise is both inaccurate and insulting to one of the most capable executives I've ever worked with. Are you planning to marry her? Another reporter called out. Grant smiled. I'm planning to ask her to become my business partner. And then I'm planning to ask her to become my life partner. Because Ayanna King has been essential to every success I've achieved, and I'd be honored if she'd build the future with me instead of just managing it for me. The room erupted with follow-up questions, but Grant was already moving toward the exit. He'd said what needed to be said publicly. Now he had to convince Ayanna privately. Grant found Ayanna in her apartment that evening, surrounded by packing boxes and looking like a woman preparing to start over completely. She answered the door wearing jeans and an old college sweatshirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail that made her look younger and somehow more vulnerable than her usual polished professional appearance. I saw the press conference, she said without preamble. That was either very brave or very stupid. Maybe both, Grant admitted, stepping into her apartment and noting how empty it felt with half her belongings already boxed. But I meant every word. Grant. Ayanna began, but he cut her off gently. Before you say anything, I need you to hear me out. Completely. Will you give me that? Ayanna nodded, settling onto her sofa with the kind of careful attention she'd always given his most important presentations. You're right that our professional relationship as employer and employee has become untenable, Grant began. But you're wrong that ending our professional partnership is the solution. What we've built over 8 years isn't a typical boss-assistant dynamic. You've been functioning as my business partner in everything but title and compensation. You've been essential to every major decision, every strategic initiative, every crisis management situation. You haven't been working for me, Ayanna. You've been working with me. Grant pulled out a folder containing the restructuring proposal he'd spent the flight developing. So I'm offering you a real partnership. Equal decision-making authority. Independent equity stake. Your own division to develop and manage. The title and compensation structure that reflects your actual contributions to the company's success. Ayanna took the folder but didn't open it immediately. Grant, even if you restructure my professional role, we still have the personal complications. Office romances create conflicts of interest regardless of the organizational chart. You're right, Grant agreed. Which is why I'm also offering you this. He pulled out a small velvet box and set it on the coffee table between them. Ayanna's breath caught as she realized what it contained. I'm not asking you to marry me tonight, Grant said quickly. I'm asking you to consider building a future where we're partners in every sense. Business partners, life partners, parenting partners for Quinn. I'm asking you to risk everything with me instead of settling for the safety of separation. Ayanna stared at the ring box for several long moments before meeting Grant's eyes. This is insane. We've known each other romantically for exactly 3 weeks. We've known each other completely for 8 years, Grant corrected gently. The romantic component just made it impossible to keep pretending we were anything less than essential to each other's happiness. Ayanna opened the partnership proposal and began reading, her professional mind automatically analyzing the terms and implications. Grant watched her process the information, noting how her expression shifted from skepticism to surprise to something that might have been hope. "This is, actually brilliant," she said finally. "It addresses every professional concern I had about conflict of interest and advancement through personal relationships." "Quinn helped me see the obvious solution," Grant admitted. "She pointed out that we've been functioning as a family for years. Making it official wouldn't change the dynamics, it would just stop requiring us to pretend otherwise." "Quinn knows about us?" "Quinn's known about us longer than we have," Grant said, smiling at the memory of his daughter's exasperated lecture. "She's been waiting for us to figure out what she considered obvious." Ayanna set down the proposal and picked up the ring box, opening it to reveal a simple, elegant solitaire that somehow managed to be both classic and distinctive. "Grant," she began, her voice thick with emotion. "I love you," Grant said simply. "I love your brilliant mind and your generous heart and the way you make everything in my life better. I love how you take care of Quinn like she's your own daughter and how you challenge me to be better than I thought possible. I love the life we've built together, and I want to keep building it together. As equals. As partners. As family." Ayanna's eyes filled with tears as she studied the ring. "If I say yes to this, to all of this, everything changes." "Everything already changed," Grant replied, moving to sit beside her on the sofa. "The only question is whether we're brave enough to embrace the change instead of running from it." Ayanna set the ring box aside and turned to face Grant fully. "Are you sure you want this? Really sure? Because once I say yes, I'm not going anywhere. You'll be stuck with me questioning your decisions, challenging your assumptions, and expecting equal partnership in everything. Promise?" Grant asked, reaching out to cup her face gently. "Promise," Ayanna whispered, leaning into his touch. Grant kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of 8 years' worth of suppressed emotion finally given free expression. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes to the business partnership?" he asked. "Yes." "And the life partnership?" "Yes," Ayanna said, laughing through her tears. "Yes to all of it. Yes to building something extraordinary together. Yes to being brave enough to choose love over fear." Grant slipped the ring onto her finger, marveling at how right it looked there, how perfectly it seemed to belong. "We're going to have to deal with media attention, board approval processes, legal restructuring. We'll handle it," Ayanna said firmly. "Together. As partners. As equals. And Quinn?" "Quinn's going to be insufferably smug about being right," Ayanna replied, her smile bright with joy and anticipation. "And I can't wait to officially become her stepmother." As Grant pulled Ayanna into his arms, he felt the last of his fears dissolve into the certainty that they were making the right choice. The brave choice. The choice that honored what they'd built together rather than sacrificing it to convention and fear. They made love that night with the kind of tender passion that comes from knowing you're building something permanent together. Every touch was a promise, every kiss a commitment to the future they'd chosen to create. And when they lay entwined afterwards, Ayanna's engagement ring catching the candlelight as she traced patterns on Grant's chest, Grant felt complete in a way he'd never experienced before. "What happens now?" Ayanna asked softly. "Now we go home," Grant replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "We tell Quinn she's getting the mother she's been wanting. We restructure the business to reflect our actual partnership. We plan a wedding that celebrates 8 years of building toward this moment. And Victoria Edwards? We'll discover that attacking our relationship only made us stronger," Grant said with satisfaction. Sometimes the best response to people who question your choices is to prove that your choices were right. Outside, Chicago hummed with late-night energy, but inside Ayana's apartment, wrapped in each other's arms, Grant and Ayana had found the courage to choose love over fear, partnership over safety, and a future built together rather than managed separately. They'd risked everything for the chance to have everything. And as Grant drifted off to sleep with the woman he loved in his arms and their future spreading out before them like a promise, he knew they'd made the right choice. The brave choice. The choice that would transform them from colleagues who'd fallen in love into partners who'd chosen to build a life worthy of the love they'd discovered. Chapter 8. 6 months later, the Barclay King partnership announcement had made business headlines across the country, with financial analysts praising the innovative restructuring that had transformed a traditional corporation into a true collaborative enterprise. Ayana's promotion from executive assistant to executive partner had been met with industry recognition for her strategic mind and business acumen, finally giving her public credit for contributions that had been essential to Barclay Enterprises' success for years. The wedding planning had become a family project, with Quinn serving as both maid of honor and enthusiastic coordinator. She'd insisted on a ceremony that reflected the family they'd always been rather than the one they were becoming, complete with references to 8 years of partnership that had led to this natural evolution. "Are you nervous?" Quinn asked as she helped Ayana with her wedding dress in the bridal suite at the Chicago Art Institute, where they'd chosen to hold the ceremony. Terrified, Ayana admitted, smiling at her soon-to-be stepdaughter in the mirror. But the good kind of terrified. The kind that means you're about to do something that matters. "Dad's been practically bouncing off the walls for weeks," Quinn reported. "Reed says he's never seen him this happy. Like, ever." Through the window, Ayana could see the courtyard where guests were gathering for the ceremony. Business associates, family members, and friends who'd watched their relationship develop over the years. Even Nathan Harris had come, bringing his new girlfriend and offering congratulations that seemed genuinely warm. "Ms. King, Mom," Quinn said, trying out the new title with a grin. "Are you ready to officially join the Barclay family chaos?" Ayana turned to embrace Quinn, her heart full with love for this remarkable girl who'd somehow become her daughter long before the legal papers made it official. "I've been part of this family for years, sweet pea. Today just makes it impossible for anyone to pretend otherwise." The ceremony itself was intimate and elegant, with vows that acknowledged 8 years of partnership leading to this moment of commitment. When Grant slipped the wedding band next to Ayana's engagement ring, his eyes were bright with tears and promises. "I take you as my partner in all things," Grant said, his voice carrying across the courtyard to their assembled friends and family. "In business and in life, in laughter and in challenge, in the extraordinary adventure of building something beautiful together. I take you as my equal and my partner," Ayana replied, her own voice strong with conviction. "In love and in purpose, in family and in dreams, in the daily choice to choose each other over fear." When they kissed as husband and wife, the applause was enthusiastic but secondary to the joy radiating from the new family they'd officially created. Quinn cheered loudest of all, clearly delighted to see the adults in her life finally acknowledge what she'd known for years. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding someone new, they're about recognizing the person who's been essential to your happiness all along. If this story of love that dared to cross professional lines touched your heart, please hit that like button and share your thoughts about unexpected love in the comments below. Have you ever discovered that someone who started as a colleague became so much more? Our Dear Love Diaries community would love to hear your stories of hearts that found home in the most unexpected places. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell, because every love story deserves to be celebrated, especially the ones that remind us that the best partnerships are built on respect, trust, and the courage to risk everything for love. Later that evening, at the reception held in Grant's penthouse with Chicago's skyline twinkling beyond the windows, Grant found himself watching his new wife as she danced with Quinn to music that filled the space where they'd held so many late-night business strategy sessions. "No regrets?" Reed asked, joining Grant at the bar where he stood observing his family. "Only that it took us 8 years to get here," Grant replied, smiling as Ayanna threw back her head and laughed at something Quinn said. "She's been my partner in everything that mattered long before today made it official." "Victoria Edwards is still trying to convince investors that your marriage is a business arrangement," Reed reported. "Though I don't think anyone's buying it after seeing you two together." Grant shrugged. Victoria's continued attempts to undermine their relationship had become more pathetic than threatening, especially after Ayanna's business innovations had led to record profits and industry recognition. Let her keep talking. Success is the best response to skepticism. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Grant, Ayanna, and Quinn found themselves alone in the penthouse that had finally become a true family home. Quinn hugged them both goodnight with the kind of unself-conscious affection that spoke to her security in their new family dynamic. "Thank you," Quinn said to both of them as she headed toward her room. "For finally figuring out what I already knew. For giving me the family I've been wanting. For being brave enough to choose love." After Quinn disappeared down the hallway, Grant and Ayanna stood in their living room, still in their wedding attire but finally, completely alone as husband and wife. "Any second thoughts, Mrs. Barkley?" Grant asked, pulling Ayanna into his arms. "Just one," Ayanna replied, smiling up at him. "I'm wondering why we waited so long to admit we were perfect for each other." "Because sometimes the most obvious truths are the hardest to see," Grant said, beginning to dance with her to music only they could hear. "But we're here now. Partners in everything. Family in every way that matters." "Family," Ayanna agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like champagne and forever. Outside, Chicago stretched beneath them, full of possibilities and new adventures. But inside their home, wrapped in each other's arms, Grant and Ayanna had found something more valuable than any business empire. They'd found love that was worth risking everything to protect, partnership that was worth fighting to preserve, and family that was worth 8 years of careful building to finally, courageously claim. They'd crossed professional lines to find personal happiness. They'd risked everything to gain everything. And as they danced in the soft light of their penthouse, surrounded by the life they'd built together and the love they'd finally acknowledged, Grant and Ayanna knew they'd made the choice that would define all their tomorrows. The choice to be brave. The choice to love completely. The choice to build something extraordinary together, one day and one decision at a time.